The air around it always felt unnaturally still. Not the cold stillness of a grave, but the thick, humid hush of something long concealed beneath Mississippi's sun-scorched earth. It was a door unlike any other at Harrow Hill, the vast cotton plantation that sprawled along a slow, winding tributary of the great river, fashioned from ancient oak, darkened almost to black. Its surface bore the polish of decades of weather and time. Tarnished iron bands stretched across it, clinging to the wood like the rigid fingers of a skeleton. The door was built into the foundation of the main house, a towering, dignified structure that presided over fields that shifted with the seasons from lush green to dusty brown to blinding white. Yet this entrance did not face those fields. It was hidden at the rear, tucked into a recessed alcove where overgrown jasmine and climbing roses tangled with invasive kudzu in a quiet struggle for space. No windows looked down upon it. No path guided footsteps toward it. It simply existed, silent, immovable, and perpetually locked. There were no written warnings about the door, no posted rules, no harshly spoken prohibitions. The understanding of it required no voice. It was absorbed into daily life at Harrow Hill as naturally as the oppressive summer heat or the constant scent of cotton and river mud. Workers, regardless of rank, never approached it. Overseers, no matter how trusted, were never seen to pause nearby. Even those who labored inside the house, moving through its kitchens, hallways, and cellars, would lower their eyes and quicken their pace when passing anywhere near that shadowed corner. Fingers tightened around baskets and broom handles. Shoulders stiffened. Conversations faltered. The consequences for ignoring this silent boundary were never displayed in public. There were no lashings, no spectacle, no open punishment. Instead, the offender would simply vanish, not in a way that stirred alarm or incited defiance. Their absence would be explained with a subdued murmur, transferred elsewhere, taken ill, gone in the night. The explanation was always vague, always brief. Questions dissolved before they fully formed. The conversation ended the moment it began. That was the true power of it. The lesson required no whip. It taught that some inquiries were not only forbidden, but perilous, even in thought. Over time, the people of Harrow Hill adapted. They trained their eyes not to linger. They disciplined their curiosity into silence. Their bodies instinctively curved away from that alcove, as though skirting an unseen abyss where light faltered and sound was swallowed whole. The door became an absence more than an object, a blind spot in the plantation's shared awareness. Yet its presence shaped everything. It governed movement, conversation, even imagination, without ever demanding acknowledgement. It stood as the purest symbol of control, not enforced by spectacle, but by suggestion, not through visible violence, but through the quiet terror of disappearance. From the grand parlor to the farthest cotton rows, its influence lingered like humidity in the air. And behind it, what could possibly exist to command such unwavering obedience? What secret required silence so complete that even curiosity felt like a crime? The very thought was a dangerous luxury, a spark that could ignite a conflagration of fear and suspicion. But for those who lived under its shadow, the question, though unasked, hung heavy in the humid air, a silent, suffocating weight. It is a question that has echoed through the forgotten corners of history, a whisper of a truth that refuses to be entirely silenced. And if you find yourself drawn into the shadows of such tales, where the past holds secrets that still chill the blood, consider joining our growing community. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, and let us uncover these forgotten histories together. Harrow Hill was not merely a plantation, It was a meticulously constructed empire carved from the rich, alluvial soil of Mississippi. Its very name, chosen by its proprietor, Elias Vane, hinted at the arduous labor and the relentless ambition that had shaped it. The main house, a formidable structure of red brick and white columns, stood atop a gentle rise, commanding a panoramic view of the fields that stretched to the horizon, a testament to Elias's vision and his unyielding will. Below, the tributary, sluggish and murky, wound its way through cypress knees and Spanish moss, a constant, almost imperceptible murmur that was the only true sound of nature allowed to persist unchallenged on the estate. The year was 1846. The air, even in the early spring, was thick with the promise of summer's oppressive heat, a palpable humidity that clung to the skin and made every breath a conscious effort. The scent of blooming jasmine mingled with the earthy aroma of freshly turned soil, the faint, sweet, sickly smell of molasses from the kitchen, and the ever-present underlying tang of human sweat and exertion. Life on Harrow Hill moved with a rhythm as predictable and unyielding as the turning of the seasons, from the first grey light of dawn until the last ember faded in the quarters. Every soul had a purpose. Every movement was observed, every deviation noted. Elias Vane, the architect of this domain, was a man forged in the crucible of ambition. He had arrived in Mississippi in 1831, a man in his mid-30s, having left behind the more established, if less lucrative, lands of Virginia. He carried with him a modest inheritance, a sharp mind, and an almost pernatural ability to discern opportunity where others saw only wilderness. He was not a man of grand gesture, or fiery pronouncements. His power lay in his quiet intensity, his methodical approach to every transaction, every decision. His eyes, a pale, almost colorless blue, seemed to absorb every detail, missing nothing, betraying no emotion. He was, by the standards of his era, not overtly cruel. He did not indulge in the casual brutalities that marked some of his peers. Instead, his cruelty was of a more refined, more chilling variety. The cold, calculating efficiency of a man who viewed human beings as assets to be managed, utilized, and, if necessary, disposed of with the same dispassionate logic applied to a failing crop or a worn-out tool. His reputation in Natchez, the bustling, opulent river town that served as the social and economic hub of the region, was one of quiet success. He was respected, if not particularly liked. His wealth grew steadily, his cotton yields were consistently high, and his affairs were always in impeccable order. He attended church regularly, contributed generously to local charities, and hosted the requisite social gatherings. Though his demeanor remained distant, his conversations clipped and precise. He was a pillar of the community, a testament to the self-made man, and beneath the veneer of Southern gentility, a predator of the most dangerous kind, one who operated entirely within the bounds of the law, bending it, shaping it, but never overtly breaking it. Nora Vane, his wife, was a woman who had once possessed a vibrant spirit, now muted by years of quiet endurance. She had come from a respected Natchez family, the Dupré, and had married Elias at the tender age of 19. 27 years had passed since then. Years spent watching her husband transform from a driven young man into something she could not fully name, something that filled her with a cold, persistent dread. Her days were a carefully choreographed performance of normally managing tea, he household, overseeing the domestic staff, hosting guests, maintaining the delicate social balance required of a plantation mistress. Her hands, once soft, were now perpetually clasped, her knuckles white as if holding onto a fragile thread of sanity. Her eyes, once bright, now held a haunted, distant quality, reflecting a landscape of internal unease. She was not innocent of the system that sustained her life. She benefited from it, was complicit in it by her very existence within it. But she was also a prisoner, bound by the rigid strictures of her time, by the laws that rendered her husband her legal master, by the social expectations that demanded her silence and her unwavering support. She moved through the grand rooms of Harrow Hill like a ghost, her silk dresses rustling softly, her presence a mere echo in the vast, silent house. She performed her duties with a meticulousness that mirrored Elias's own, a desperate attempt to maintain order in a world that felt increasingly chaotic and terrifying beneath its polished surface. She was afraid not just of Elias, but of the nameless thing that had taken root in their lives, a thing that manifested most acutely in the heavy, silent presence of that locked door. The community of Nakes, with its grand mansions and bustling riverfront, its balls and its church socials, formed the outer layer of this carefully constructed world. It was a web of interconnected families, of shared interests and unspoken understandings. Visitors came and went from Harrow Hill, their carriages kicking up dust on the long drive, their laughter echoing briefly through the halls. They spoke of cotton prices, of politics, of the latest fashions from New Orleans. They spoke of everything and nothing, carefully avoiding the deeper currents that ran beneath the surface of their polite society. The church, a stately edifice in town, offered solace, and sermons, reinforcing the established order, providing a moral framework that for men like Elias conveniently justified their actions and absolved their consciences. In this world, silence was not merely the absence of sound. It was a language, a tool of control, a shield behind which unspeakable truths could fester and grow. The locked door was the ultimate symbol of this silence, a physical manifestation of the unspoken, the unacknowledged, the terrifyingly real. It was a constant oppressive presence, a monument to the things that were not to be seen, not to be heard, not to be questioned. And in the suffocating heat of that Mississippi spring, the stage was set for a quiet unraveling, a slow, inexorable descent into the heart of Harrow Hill's darkest secret. The wagon that brought Henry to Harrow Hill was old and creaking, its wheels groaning under the weight of a few meager possessions and the oppressive weight of a new beginning. He had come from a plantation near Vicksburg, one that had fallen into disarray after its owner, a man named Fitzwilliam, had succumbed to a sudden fever, leaving behind a mountain of debts and no clear heir. The estate had been dissolved, its assets, including its enslaved population, dispersed to various buyers across the region. Henry, a young man of 22, had found himself part of a small group purchased by Elias Vane. Henry was not like the others in his group. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so, but his silence was not born of dullness or resignation. It was the silence of a keen observer, a mind constantly at work, processing every detail, every nuance of his new surroundings. His eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. He moved with a careful, almost deliberate grace, his body lean and strong from years of labor, but his spirit held a spark of something untamed, a quiet curiosity that had not yet been extinguished by the harsh realities of his life. He had learned early on that in a world where one's very existence was dictated by others, the ability to see without being seen, to hear without being heard, was a powerful, if subtle, form of resistance. His first days at Harrow Hill were a blur of new faces, new routines, and the overwhelming sense of being an outsider. The work was hard, as it always was, but there was an almost military precision to the operations here that he hadn't encountered before. The fields were meticulously tended, the tools kept in perfect order, the overseers efficient and watchful. He learned the names of the other workers, the layout of the quarters, the rhythm of the bells that marked the day's beginning and end. He learned to blend in, to become another face in the crowd, while his mind catalogued every detail. It was on his second day, while carrying a heavy sack of cornmeal from the storeroom to the kitchen, that he first saw it, the door. He had taken a shortcut, a path less traveled by the other workers, hoping to avoid the midday sun for a few extra moments. And there it was, tucked into the shadowed alcove, partially obscured by the rampant jasmine. It was just a door at first glance, old, heavy, locked. But something about it snagged his attention. Perhaps it was the way the light seemed to shy away from it, or the unnatural stillness of the air around it. He paused, his muscles straining under the weight of the sack, his gaze fixed on the dark wood. He felt a prickle of unease, a subtle warning that resonated deep within him. He had seen many locked doors in his life, storerooms, smokers, the master's private study, but this one felt different. It exuded an aura of absolute finality, a sense of something not merely secured, but utterly sealed away. As he continued his journey, he began to observe. He noticed that no one mentioned it, not in passing, not in complaint, not even in idle gossip. It was as if the door simply did not exist in their collective vocabulary. He saw an older woman, her back bent with years of labor, carrying a pail of water. Her path would take her within yards of the door, but her eyes remained fixed straight ahead, her pace quickening almost imperceptibly as she passed. He saw a young boy chasing a stray chicken veer sharply away from the alcove, as if an invisible barrier stood in his path. Then he noticed Ruth. She was an older woman, her face a road map of lines etched by sun and sorrow, her movements slow but deliberate. She had been at Harrow Hill, he learned, since its very inception, a silent fixture in the domestic staff. One afternoon, he saw her emerge from the main house, carrying a basket of laundry. Her path led her past the rear of the house, and for a fleeting moment her gaze flickered towards the alcove. It was not a look of curiosity, or even fear, but something far more profound, a deep, weary sorrow, a profound resignation. Her eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to hold a universe of unspoken stories. Then just as quickly her gaze shifted. Her face became a mask, and she continued on her way, her steps heavy. He also noticed Augustus Lyle, the head overseer. Lyle was a man of imposing stature, with a stern countenance, and a reputation for unwavering loyalty to Elias Vane. He moved with an air of authority, his presence commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Henry observed that whenever Lyle was near the main house, particularly in the vicinity of the rear entrance, his posture would subtly change. His shoulders would square, his jaw would tighten, and his eyes would sweep the area with an almost predatory vigilance, as if guarding an invisible perimeter. It was a subtle shift, one that most would miss. But Henry, with his heightened senses, registered it immediately. Lyle wasn't just patrolling. He was protecting. The more Henry observed, the more the door became a focal point of his quiet investigations. It was a silent challenge, a puzzle that demanded to be solved. He understood instinctively that the answers it held were dangerous, perhaps even deadly, but the very intensity of the silence surrounding it, the almost ritualistic avoidance practiced by everyone on the plantation, only fueled his quiet determination. He began to observe the house itself, the patterns of movement, the comings and goings, the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. He was a new set of eyes, unburdened by years of conditioned fear, and what he saw, what he felt, was a growing certainty that behind that locked door lay not just a secret, but a living, breathing truth that Harrow Hill had desperately tried to bury. The night air of late spring in Mississippi was a heavy, suffocating blanket. thick with the scent of damp earth and the incessant chorus of cicadas. It was a night when sleep came fitfully, if at all, even for those exhausted by a day of relentless labor. Henry, lying on his thin pallet in the crowded quarters, found himself restless. The heat was oppressive, pressing down on him, and the low murmurs of his fellow workers, some stirring in their sleep, others simply unable to find it, did little to soothe his unease. His mind, ever active, replayed the day's observations, particularly the silent dance around the locked door. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the others. A sliver of moonlight filtered through the cracks in the rough-hewn wall of the cabin, illuminated the dusty floor. He moved to the small, almost imperceptible gap in the wall, a knot-hole that offered a narrow, distorted view of the main house's rear. It was a habit he had developed, a way to observe the world beyond his immediate confines, to understand the rhythms, for Master's house, the movements of those who held power. He had been watching for perhaps an hour, the world outside bathed in the pale silver glow of the moon, when he saw it, a carriage, its wheels muffled by the soft earth of the drive, approached the house, not from the main entrance, but from a less used track that wound through a copse of live oaks. It was a dark, unassuming vehicle, without the usual ornate flourishes of a visitor's conveyance. It stopped some distance from the house, its horses snorting softly in the stillness. A figure emerged from the carriage, a man of medium height, dressed in dark formal attire. Even from a distance, Henry could discern the precise, almost clinical way he moved. This was Dr. Warren Speck, the physician from Nashes, whose visits were usually announced, his presence a sign of illness or birth. But this visit was different. There was no urgency, no frantic summons, only a quiet, almost clandestine arrival. Augustus Lyle, the head overseer, materialized from the shadows of the house, moving with a swiftness that belied his bulk. He met Dr. Spolk. He met Dr. Scaping, the call, Speck at the carriage, a brief, almost imperceptible exchange of nods passing between them. There were no words, no greetings. It was a silent, prearranged rendezvous. Lyle then led Dr. Costa, Speck not to the main entrance, nor to the side door used by tradesmen, but directly towards the rear of the house, towards the very alcove where the locked door resided. Henry's breath hitched in his throat. He pressed his eye closer to the knothole, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He watched as Lyle produced a key, a large, heavy-looking key that glinted briefly in the moonlight, and inserted it into the lock of the dark oak door. The sound, though distant, was distinct, a heavy metallic click followed by the deep, resonant creak of ancient hinges as the door swung inward, revealing a cavernous darkness beyond. Dr. Speck disappeared into the black mam, followed by Lyle, who then pulled the door shut behind them, plunging the alcove back into its accustomed shadow. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant croaking of frogs from the river. Henry remained frozen, his eye glued to the gap, his mind racing. What were they doing in there? Why the secrecy? Why the dead of night? Minutes stretched into an eternity. Henry strained his ears, trying to discern any sound from within the house. He heard nothing for a long while, only the thrimming of his own blood in his ears. Then, faint, muffled, almost imperceptible, he heard it. Not a scream, not a cry of pain, nothing so dramatic. It was a series of indistinct sounds, a low, rhythmic thudding followed by a soft, almost mechanical clinking, like instruments being moved or adjusted. Then a deeper, almost guttural sigh, quickly stifled. It was not human speech, not a struggle, but something far more unsettling in its ambiguity. It was the sound of work being done, of a process unfolding cold and methodical in the absolute darkness. The sounds continued for what felt like an hour, a chilling symphony of the unknown. Then, as abruptly as they had begun, they ceased. Another stretch of silence, even more profound than before. Finally, the heavy oak door creaked open again. Lyell emerged first, his face unreadable in the moonlight, followed by Dr. Speck, who carried a small, dark satchel. They exchanged another brief, silent nod. The owl relocked the door with the same heavy key, the click echoing faintly in the night. Dr. Speck returned to his carriage, his movement still precise, his demeanor unchanged. He climbed in, and the carriage, without a word or a backward glance, turned and disappeared back down the winding track, swallowed by the darkness of the live oaks. Lial remained for a moment, his gaze sweeping the area before melting back into the shadows of the house. Henry remained at the knee-hole long after they were gone, his body trembling, his mind reeling. He had witnessed something profoundly disturbing, something that defied easy explanation. The sounds, the secrecy, the doctor's presence, the locked door. It all coalesced into a chilling tableau of hidden activity. In the morning, the world of Harrow Hill seemed to have reset itself. The sun rose, painting the fields in hues of gold and green. The bells rang, calling everyone to work. The air was thick with the usual sounds of the plantation. The distant shouts of overseers, the rhythmic thud of hoes in the soil, the lowing of cattle. Everything looked the same. But for Henry, something had irrevocably shifted. The locked door was no longer just a symbol of unspoken fear. It was a gateway to a tangible, terrifying reality. He had heard the sounds of what lay beyond, and the memory of them, indistinct, yet deeply unsettling, would forever haunt his waking hours. The world, he realized, was full of such hidden truths, secrets that festered beneath the surface of polite society, waiting for an unsuspecting eye to glimpse them. And if you're drawn to the unsettling nature of such concealed histories, where the truth is often more terrifying than any fiction, remember to like this video and share it with those who appreciate a good mystery. It helps us bring more of these forgotten tales to light. Henry knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he could not speak of what he had witnessed. The memory of the disappearing workers, the vague explanations, the chilling silence that followed, was a potent deterrent, but the knowledge festered within him, a burning ember that demanded understanding. His gaze, once merely observant, now carried a new intensity, a quiet desperation to piece together the fragments of truth. He turned his attention to Ruth, her weary eyes, her profound sorrow, her long history on Harrow Hill. She was the key he instinctively felt. But approaching her required a delicate touch, a patience that bordered on reverence. Ruth was a woman who had learned the hard lessons of survival in a brutal world. Trust was a luxury she could ill afford, and words she knew could be weapons. Henry began subtly. He would offer to carry her heavy baskets to help with the more arduous tasks in the kitchen or laundry. He would listen, truly listen, when she spoke of the day's chores, of the weather, of the small, mundane details of plantation life. He never pressed, never questioned directly. He simply offered a quiet presence, a steady pair of hands, and an unspoken understanding that he saw her, truly saw her, beyond her station. Slowly, painstakingly, a fragile bridge of trust began to form between them. Ruth, initially weary, began to respond to his quiet kindness. She would offer him a small, knowing smile, a shared glance that spoke volumes. One sweltering afternoon, while they were both shelling peas on the back porch, away from the immediate earshot of the house, Ruth finally spoke of something beyond the mundane. "This place," she began, her voice a low murmur, barely audible above the drone of insects. It got its own kind of hunger, not for food, not for water, for quiet. She paused, her knelled fingers working rhythmically on a pea pod, and for forgetting. Henry kept his gaze on his own hands, shelling peas, but his entire being was focused on her words. "Forgetting what, Ruth?" he asked, his voice equally soft, almost a whisper. Ruth sighed, a deep, shuddering sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. Things that ain't supposed to be remembered, people that ain't supposed to be gone. She, hell, oaked up then, her eyes meeting his, and in their depths, Henry saw a profound, ancient sorrow. "You got new eyes, boy. You see things others done. Learn to look away from." He nodded, a silent acknowledgement. "I saw the Dr. Ruth that night, and Mr. Lyle and the door." Ruth's face remained impassive, but her hands stilled. "You saw too much, Henry. That door, it ain't just wood and iron. It's a promise of silence." He waited patiently for her to continue. He knew better than to rush her. "There was a man," she began, her voice dropping even lower, "named Cyrus. Strong man, good with horses. Came here around 39, I reckon. Good worker. One day he got sick. A fever. They said, 'Master Vane.' He sent for the doctor. Not spec back then. Another one. Doctor came. Looked at him. Said he was bad. Real bad. Next day they said Cyrus passed in the night. Buried him out by the old oak. They said, but I never saw no burial, no coffin. Just gone." Henry felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "Gone where, Ruth?" Ruth shook her head slowly. "That's the thing, ain't it? Nobody ever really knew. Just gone. And then, a few weeks later, Master Vane, he got a new horse, a fine stallion, strong and fast. Said he traded for it. But that horse, it had a way of looking at you, a way of moving that reminded me of Cyrus. Strong, proud, and then it was gone too a few months later. Sold off, they said." She looked at Henry, her eyes piercing. "But the way Master Vane talked about that horse, like it was a thing he owned, a thing he could use up, and then get rid of, it was the same way he talked about Cyrus before he was gone." The implication hung heavy in the air, unspoken, yet terrifyingly clear. Cyrus hadn't died. He had been traded, disposed of. And then there was Della, Ruth continued, her voice now a mere whisper, as if the very act of speaking her name was a transgression. "Sweet girl, Della, good with the children, always singing. Round 43 she started getting thin. Coughing Master Vane, he said she had the consumption, sent for drive spec. That time spec came, stayed a long time in the house. Said Della was fading fast. Next thing we know, they say Della passed, buried her next to Cyrus. They said, but again no burial, no coffin, just gone." Ruth's gaze drifted towards the main house, towards the hidden alcove. "But Della, she had a little wooden bird she carved. Always carried it with her. Said it was her mamma's. After she was gone, I saw it on Master Vane's desk, just for a day or two. Then it was gone too, like it was never there." Henry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the humid air. The pieces were beginning to fit, forming a mosaic of unspeakable horror. The falsified death records, the clandestine visits from the doctor, the disappearances. It wasn't death that was behind the locked door. It was something far more calculated, far more insidious. Payment as agreed has been deposited. We anticipate similar opportunities next quarter, pending your usual discretion regarding documentation. 3 units shipment documentation. The words, stripped of their human context, were chilling in their implication. They spoke of commodities, of transactions, of a deliberate obfuscation of truth. Nora's hands trembled, and she quickly gathered the papers, placing the letter back on the stack, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself it was merely business, a common practice in the complex world of plantation economics, but the cold dread that settled in her stomach refused to dissipate. Then, a few weeks later, she overheard a conversation. It was late evening, and Elias and Dr. Dogger and Speck were in the study, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. Nora, unable to sleep, had descended the grand staircase for a glass of water, her bare feet silent on the Persian rugs. As she passed the study door, slightly ajar, fragments of their hushed exchange drifted into the hallway. The fever was convincing enough. Elias, the records are quite clear. No one will question it. That was Speck's voice, smooth and unctuous than Elias's colder, sharper. And the other matter, the one from 43. Are we certain there are no lingering threads? Absolutely, my dear Vane. The new identity is firmly established. A clean slate, as it were, a new life far from here. No one would ever connect the two. The consumption diagnosis was quite effective in ensuring a swift, unquestioned departure. Nora froze, her hand gripping the banister so tightly her knuckles arched. The one from 43, Della. Ruth's words, whispered in hushed tones, echoed in her mind. Sweet girl Della said she had the consumption, just gone. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. The fever for Cyrus, the consumption for Della, the documentation, the shipment, the new identity, the full shape of what she had been living inside for years. What Elias had been doing began to coalesce into a monstrous, undeniable truth. It was not merely the buying and selling of human beings, a practice she had long accepted as the brutal reality of her world. It was something far more sinister, the deliberate systematic eraser of lives, the creation of false deaths, the trafficking of legally dead people into new forms of bondage, all for profit, all under the cloak of medical authority and meticulous record-keeping. Nora felt a profound internal scream rise within her, trapped behind the carefully constructed facade of her composure. Her world, once merely uncomfortable, now felt like a charnel house built on lies and stolen lives. She was not a villain, not in the overt sense. She had never raised a hand in anger, never directly participated in the cruelties, but she was not a hero either. She was a woman of her era, trapped by the ironclad laws that bound her to her husband, by the social architecture that rendered her invisible in matters of business, yet accountable for the smooth running of her household. Her wealth, her status, her very existence were inextricably linked to Elias's enterprise. The realization was devastating. She had been complicit, not just through her silence, but through her very presence, her acceptance of the life Elias provided. The grand house, the fine clothes, the social standing, all of it was tainted, built upon the deliberate disappearance of human beings. Her fear, once a vague, shapeless dread, now had a name, a face, a chilling methodology. She saw Elias not as her husband, but as a meticulous butcher, carving up lives with the precision of a surgeon, all for the sake of profit and power. Her nights became sleepless torments, her days a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation, her mind constantly replaying the overheard words, the chilling phrases from the letter. She looked at the faces of the enslaved workers, seeing not just their labor, but their vulnerability, their potential for erasure. She looked at Elias, seeing a stranger, a monster cloaked in respectability. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing a woman trapped, complicit, and utterly terrified. The fracture was complete. The dam had broken, and Nora Vine, for the first time in years, began to contemplate a future that lay beyond the suffocating confines of Harrow Hill, a future that might require an act of desperate, terrifying courage. The atmosphere at Harrow Hill, already thick with the humid heat of summer, grew heavy with an unspoken tension, a palpable sense of unease that settled over the plantation like a storm cloud. Henry, now burdened with Ruth's fragmented truths and his own chilling observations, found him so. Lief, moving through the days with a heightened sense of awareness, every nerve alert, every shadow a potential threat. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but the knowledge he possessed, the terrible implications of the locked door, had ignited a fire within him that he could not extinguish. His quiet investigation continued now with a desperate urgency. He searched for clues, for anything that might corroborate Ruth's stories, anything that might shed more light on the dark dealings behind the oak door. His opportunity came unexpectedly during a sweltering afternoon, spent clearing brush near the old wood pile, a neglected corner of the estate where discarded items often found their final resting place. As he pulled away a tangle of thorny vines, his hand brushed against something stiff, half buried in the damp earth. He dug it out carefully, his heart quickening. It was a piece of paper crumpled and stained with mud and what looked like dried blood, but still legible in parts. It was a partial record, a fragment of a ledger page. Torn and discarded, his eyes scanned the faded ink. Cyrus 1841, fever transferred Montgomery Plantation, Louisiana. 300, Della 1843, consumption reassigned, Caldwell Estate, Alabama. 250, Elias Vane, payment received, Dr. Speck's services rendered. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Transferred, reassigned, payment received. It was all there in stark cold print. The names Ruth had whispered, the dates, the false diagnosis, the destinations. It wasn't just a theory anymore. It was documented, a chilling testament to the methodical nature of Elias Vane's enterprise. The numbers, he realized, were not ages, but prices. The services rendered by Dr. Speck were not for healing, but for facilitating these monstrous transactions. Henry quickly folded the document, tucking it deep into his worn trousers, his hands trembling. He had found his proof, but it was a proof that felt like a death warrant. He knew instinctively that this piece of paper was incredibly dangerous, a direct link to the unspeakable. His changed behavior, subtle as it was, did not go unnoticed. Augustus Lyle, the head overseer, was a man whose loyalty to Elias Vane was absolute, forged in a past that Elias held like a key, a secret leverage that ensured Lyle's unwavering obedience. Lyle had a keen eye for deviation, a finely tuned sense for anything that disrupted the carefully maintained order of Harrow Hill. He had observed Henry from the moment he arrived, noting his quiet intelligence, his observant nature. Now he saw a new intensity in the young man's eyes, a restlessness in his movements, a subtle shift in his demeanor that spoke of a mind troubled by more than just the day's labor. Lyle began to watch Henry more closely. He would appear unexpectedly in the fields where Henry worked, his presence a silent, imposing question. He would ask seemingly innocuous questions, his gaze piercing, searching for any flicker of discomfort, any telltale sign. "You settling in well, Henry? No complaints about the work?" His voice was even, but the underlying threat was palpable. Henry, ever careful, would respond with polite deference. His face a mask of weary compliance, but he felt Lyle's eyes on him, a constant chilling pressure. Elias Vane, ever calculating, also began to notice. He had a network of informants, a web of eyes and ears that reported every whisper, every perceived transgression. Lee's subtle reports, combined with Elias's own observations of Henry's quiet intensity, raised a red flag. Elias did not confront. He observed. He would watch Henry from the veranda, his pale blue eyes, like chips of ice, dissecting the young man's movements, his interactions. He saw the way Henry's gaze would sometimes linger, almost impersis. Pitiably on the rear of the house, on the shadowed alcove, he saw the quiet conversations with Ruth, the shared glances. Elias Vane was a man who understood the power of information, and he recognized the dangerous spark of curiosity in Henry as a potential threat to his meticulously constructed empire. The atmosphere at Harrow Hill became suffocating. Henry felt the walls closing in, the air growing thin. He knew he was being watched, that his every move was scrutinized. The discarded document, now a heavy weight in his pocket, felt like a ticking clock. Ruth, sensing the escalating danger, sought him out one evening, her face etched with a fear he had not seen before. "Henry," she whispered, her voice urgent, her eyes wide with alarm. "You got to stop. You hear me? You got to stop looking, stop asking. They watching you. Mr. Lyle, he got eyes everywhere. And Master Vane. He don't forget nothing. He don't forget nothing." She gripped his arm, her old fingers surprisingly strong. "Cyrus, Della, they ain't the only ones. There's others, always others. You think you can fight this. You think you can win. You're just another one they can make disappear. Please, Henry, for your own sake, stop." Henry looked at her at the genuine terror in her eyes, and his heart ached. He knew she was right. He knew the danger was immense, perhaps insurmountable. But he also knew he couldn't stop. The image of the crumpled document, the names, the cold transactions, burned in his mind. The thought of Cyrus, strong and proud, transferred like a piece of livestock, of Della, sweet and singing, reassigned like an object. He couldn't unsee what he had seen, couldn't unhear what he had heard. The injustice, the sheer dehumanization of it all, had taken root deep within him, and he found he could not simply turn away. He had to know more. He had to know more. He had to find a way. The locked door, once a mystery, was now a symbol of a profound evil, and Henry, against all reason, felt compelled to confront it, even if it meant his own destruction. The truth, once glimpsed, can be a heavy burden, a dangerous companion. And if you're finding yourself drawn deeper into this unsettling narrative, remember to hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single chilling detail as this story unfolds. The late August air hung heavy and still over Harrow Hill, a suffocating blanket of heat and humidity that promised no relief. The cicadas sang their deafening chorus, a relentless thrum that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the old house. It was a night ripe for secrets, for actions taken under the cloak of darkness and the oppressive silence of a sleeping world. A rare convergence of circumstances had left the main house unusually quiet, almost deserted. Elias Vane, ever the meticulous businessman, had departed for Natchez 2 days prior, called away by an urgent matter concerning a large cotton shipment and a complex financial negotiation. His absence, though temporary, left a palpable void in the house, a momentary lifting of the constant, watchful pressure he exerted. Augustus Lyle, the head overseer, was also absent from his usual post near the house. A sudden torrential downpour, 2 days earlier, had caused a lower field dangerously close to the tributary to flood. The cotton crop, nearly ready for harvest, was at risk. Lyle, with a team of workers, had been tirelessly engaged in shoring up the levees, diverting water, and salvaging what they could. He would not return to the house until the crisis was averted, his attention entirely consumed by the immediate threat to the plantation's profitability. This left Nora Vane, for the first time in years, truly alone in the vast echoing silence of the main house. The domestic staff had retired to their quarters, the last embers of the kit Chen fire long since banked. The only sounds were the distant croaking of frogs, the rustle of leaves in a phantom breeze, and the frantic beating of her own heart. For 2 days since Elias's departure, Nora had wrestled with a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. The fragments of the letter, the overheard conversation, Ruth's haunted eyes, and Henry's quiet, desperate inquiries, it had all coalesced into an unbearable weight. The walls she had built around herself had crumbled, leaving her exposed to the full, horrifying truth of her husband's enterprise. She could no longer pretend ignorance. She could no longer hide behind complicity. The locked door, once a symbol of her husband's power, had become a monument to her own moral decay, a silent accusation that echoed in every corner of her mind. Tonight she would open it. Her hands trembled as she lit a single slender candle in her bedchamber, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. She dressed in a simple dark gown, her movements slow and deliberate, as if preparing for a sacred yet profane ritual. She moved through the silent house like a ghost, her bare feet making no sound on the cool, polished floors. The air grew heavier, colder as she descended to the ground floor, her candle a tiny beacon against the encroaching darkness. She reached the rear of the house, the shadowed alcove where the jasmine and kudzu fought for dominance. The air here was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a primal smell that seemed to cling to the very stones. The heavy oak door loomed before her, darker than the surrounding shadows, its iron bands like the ribs of some ancient sleeping beast. Nora took a deep, shuddering breath. Trying to steady her racing heart, she reached into the pocket of Elias's discarded waistcoat, which she had found hanging in his study. A desperate, almost reckless act of defiance. Her fingers closed around a heavy, cold object. The key, the same key Augustus Lyle had used that night. Glinting in the moonlight, with a trembling hand, she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a stiff metallic groan, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the house. The click that followed was deafening in the profound silence. She pushed the door inward slowly, agonizingly. The hinges shrieked, a long, drawn-out wail that seemed to tear at the fabric of the night. A wave of cold, stale air, thick with the scent of dust, old paper, and something else, something metallic and faintly organic, washed over her. The darkness beyond was absolute, a gaping maw that seemed to swallow the meager light of her candle. Nora raised the candle higher, its flame struggling against the oppressive gloom. The light pierced the darkness, revealing a small, low ceiling room. Its walls of rough-hewn stone, damp and stained. It was not a dungeon, not a torture chamber, nothing so overtly dramatic. It was a utilitarian space, meticulously organized, chilling in its cold efficiency. Against one wall stood a heavy iron-bound chest, its lid closed. On a rough wooden table in the center of the room, illuminated by her flickering candle, lay a collection of objects that made her breath catch in her throat. There were several leather-bound ledgers, their pages filled with Elias's precise, elegant script. Beside them, a stack of official-looking documents, some bearing the seal of the county clerk, others the letterhead of various medical practices. A collection of medical instruments gleaming dully in the candlelight. Scalpels, forceps, syringes lay neatly arranged on a clean linen cloth, and beside them a small tarnished silver locket, its chain broken, its surface engraved with the single delicate initial Della. But it was Nan, off these objects, chilling as they were, that truly shattered Nora. It was the other items carefully placed on a smaller shelf. Almost hidden in the shadows, a child's wooden bird, crudely carved but lovingly smoothed, its wings spread as if in flight. Ruth's words echoed in her mind. Della, She had a little wooden bird she carved, said it was her mamma's, and beside it, a small worn leather pouch tied with a faded string. Nora's trembling fingers untied it, and she poured its contents onto the table, a handful of dried pressed wildflowers, still retaining a faint sweet scent, and a small, intricately braided horsehair bracelet, its dark strands interwoven with a single bright red thread. Cyrus Ruth's words again. Strong man, good with horses. The way Master Vane talked about that horse, like it was a thing he owned. These were not objects of the dead. These were objects of the living, cherished possessions, imbued with memory and love, left behind by those who had been made to disappear. They were proof, undeniable and devastating, that Cyrus and Della and countless others, whose names filled the ledgers, had not died. They had been erased, their lives stolen, their identities stripped away, their very humanity reduced to a transaction, a line in a ledger, a shipment to another plantation, another life of forced labor under a new false name. Nora stared at the objects, her candle flickering, casting grotesque shadows on the stone walls. The cold, stale air of the room seemed to press in on her, suffocating her. The silence was no longer merely oppressive. It was a scream, a chorus of silent accusations from the lives that had been extinguished within these walls, not by death, but by the cold, calculating hand of her husband. Her world, her carefully constructed reality, shattered into a million pieces around her. The truth, when finally revealed, was not a monster, but something far more terrifying, the meticulous bureaucratic evil of man. The candle, now a stub, cast long, dancing shadows that distorted the small stone-walled room, making the mundane objects within seem grotesque, imbued with a sinister life of their own. Nora Vane, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a horror that transcended mere fear, sat on the cold, damp floor, surrounded by the damning evidence of her husband's enterprise. The initial shock had given way to a chilling clarity, a terrible understanding that settled deep within her bones. She had spent hours in that room, meticulously poring over the ledgers, the correspondence, the medical documents. Elazar's precise, elegant script, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock her with its cold, dispassionate efficiency. Each page was a testament to a monstrous system, a meticulously crafted web of deceit and profit. The ledgers detailed everything: names, dates of death, fabricated illnesses, the names of the physicians who signed the false death certificates: Dr. Speck, Dr. Speck, Dr. Montgomery, Dr. Caldwell, a network of complicit medical professionals across 3 states. Then the transfer dates, the receiving plantations, the new identities, and most chillingly the purchase prices and resale values. Human lives reduced to columns of figures, to profit margins. The correspondence confirmed the scale of the operation. Letters from men of influence, men she knew from Natchez society, from Charleston, from New Orleans, men with respected names who spoke in coded language of shipments, units, and discrete arrangements. They were partners in this macabre trade, profiting from the systematic eraser and reinslavement of individuals who had been declared legally dead. The system was designed to be invisible, to leave no trace, to operate entirely within the legal loopholes of property law and medical authority law. A person declared dead could not testify, could not claim their past, could not be traced. They simply ceased to exist, only to be reborn as a new asset in a new location under a new name, their value maximized through this horrific sleight of hand. Nora's gaze fell upon the small personal items again. Della's wooden bird, Cyrus's horsehair bracelet. These were not just objects. They were anchors to stolen lives, silent witnesses to an unspeakable crime. They were the proof, that at least 3 people who were declared dead at Harrow Hill between 1839 and 1845 were not dead when that door last closed. They were alive somewhere, working under false pretenses. Their pasts obliterated, their families left to mourn a death that never occurred. The implications were staggering, not just for Elias, but for the entire network of powerful men involved. Exposure would mean ruin, not just financially, but socially, legally. It would unravel a carefully constructed facade of respectability, revealing the rot beneath. Nora felt a profound nausea, a wave of despair that threatened to consume her. What was she to do? The choice before her was stark, terrifying, and utterly without a clear path to righteousness. She could expose Elias. She had the ledger, the correspondence, the irrefutable proof. She could take it to the authorities, to the newspapers, to the very society that lauded her husband. But what would be the cost? Her own reputation would be irrevocably destroyed. She would be ostracized, perhaps even imprisoned, as an accomplice. Her life, as she knew it, would cease to exist, and even if she succeeded, would just as truly be served in a world where such practices, though illegal in their specific execution, were built upon a foundation of accepted dehumanization. Would the system truly be dismantled? Or would Elias simply be replaced by another, more careful predator? She could destroy evidence, burn the ledgers, shred the letters, bury the personal items, protect herself, maintain the facade of her life, and allow the monstrous enterprise to continue unhindered. This was the path of least resistance, the path of self-preservation. It was the path she had, in essence, been walking for years, through her silence, through her complicity. But as her eyes fell upon Della's wooden bird, a flicker of something ignited within her. Not heroism, not a sudden surge of moral courage, but a cold, hard resolve, born of years of suppressed rage and a desperate need for agency. She was a woman of her era, trapped by law, by property, by the social architecture that made her invisible and accountable simultaneously. She could not change the world, but she could perhaps change her own small corner of it. Nora made her choice. It was not a choice of heroism, but of survival. With a twist that complicated every sympathy the listener might have built, she would not expose Elias to the world. The risk was too great, the outcome too uncertain, the personal cost too devastating. But she would not destroy the evidence either. Instead, she would take it, all of it, the ledgers, the correspondence, the medical documents, and the small, heartbreaking personal items. She carefully packed them into a sturdy canvas bag she found in the corner of the room, her movements now precise, methodical, mirroring Elias's own chilling efficiency. She would use this knowledge, this damning proof, not to bring down the system, but to secure her own future, to carve out a measure of freedom and safety for herself, and perhaps for a few others. She would use it as leverage, a silent, ever-present threat that would bind Elias to her, not through love or loyalty, but through fear. She would become his silent partner, his shadow, ensuring that her own needs, her own quiet acts of defiance, would be met. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would find a way to subtly disrupt his monstrous enterprise from within, to make his meticulous system just a little less efficient, a little less profitable, one quiet act at a time. The locked door had revealed its secrets, and in doing so, it had transformed Nora Vane from a prisoner into a silent, dangerous player in a game she had never asked to join. The first rays of dawn, pale and hesitant, began to filter through the cracks in the heavy oak door as Nora Vane finally emerged from the basement room. Her face was a mask of exhaustion, but her eyes, though still haunted, held a new steely glint. The canvas bag, heavy with its damning contents, was clutched tightly in her hand. She relocked the door, the metallic click echoing with a chilling finality, and then, moving with a quiet determination, she ascended the stairs, leaving the secrets of the room to fester in the darkness once more. The fates of the characters, like the truths they carried, were not clean, nor were they delivered with the satisfying clarity of conventional justice. Elias Vane returned from Nashe 2 days later, his usual cold composure intact. He noticed nothing amiss. The house was in order. The fields were recovering from the flood, and his wife, though perhaps a little paler than usual, performed her duties with her customary quiet efficiency. He continued his meticulous management of Harrow Hill, his empire of cotton and human transactions. He never knew that his most guarded secret, the very foundation of his power, now resided not in a locked room, but in the possession of his own wife. He continued to profit, to expand, to maintain his respected facade in Natchez society, oblivious to the silent internal war being waged against him. His end, when it came years later, was peaceful in his own bed, a testament to the enduring power of his carefully constructed lies. Nora Vane did not flee Harrow Hill, nor did she expose Elias. Instead, she became a different kind of mistress. The canvas bag, with its ledgers and letters, was hidden deep within a false bottom of her cedar chest, a constant, silent presence. She began to make subtle demands, requests that Elias, ever pragmatic, found himself unable to refuse: more comfortable quarters for certain elderly workers, better medical care for the sick, a quiet word that ensured a particular family was not separated. She never threatened, never explicitly mentioned the contents of her hidden trove. She simply presented her requests with a quiet, unyielding resolve, and Elias, sensing an unspoken shift in her demeanor, a new, unsettling strength, complied. She quietly carved out her own financial security, subtly redirecting small sums, placing investments in her own name, building a safeguard for the day Elias might stumble. Outwardly, her life at Harrow Hill appeared unchanged. Inwardly, however, she had become someone else entirely, a woman sustained by silent resistance, careful strategy, and a sorrow that never loosened its grip. She carried the weight of the lives she could not save. In time, she became a living record of Elias's crimes, a quiet keeper of truths no one else dared to speak. Henry, shaken by Ruth's warning and the horror of what he had uncovered, understood how precarious his position had become. Open defiance would mean ruin. Silence, however, felt like complicity. So he chose a third path. With painstaking care, he transcribed the essential details from the discarded document: names, dates, destinations, committing them to memory. Then he destroyed the original, grinding its fragments into the river mud until nothing remained. He continued his duties as though nothing had changed, but beneath that calm surface, a new resolve had taken root. He gathered serfs, kills. He saved what little he could. He waited. 2 years later, on a night without moonlight, he left Harrow Hill. Not in panic, but according to a plan shaped by patience and precision. He carried more than hope for freedom. He carried knowledge, dangerous, damning knowledge, of Elias Vane's enterprise. Traveling north, he eventually secured work aboard a riverboat, where his sharp mind and reserved nature served him well. Yet he never forgot the names or the faces of those who had vanished. He bore them within him, a quiet vow that their erasure would not be complete. Ruth remained at Harrow Hill. Time etched deeper lines into her face, but it also brought a subdued satisfaction. Henry had escaped. She sensed a shift in Nora long before it was spoken. There was a steadiness now, a restrained authority. Small mercies began to appear where none had existed before. Ruth understood what had happened behind closed doors, without needing explanation. Secrets had been disturbed. Something unseen was resisting from within the house itself. She carried on in her duties, watchful and wise, a silent guardian of memory, whose presence steadied those around her. Augustus Lyle stayed loyal to Elias. Bound by secrets of his own, he enforced the rules and guarded Harrow Hill's hidden machinery without hesitation. He never suspected Nora's awakening or Henry's escape. He remained what he had always been, a cog in a merciless system, tethered by his own buried sins. Dr. Warren Speck continued his discreet visits to Harrow Hill and neighboring estates. His medical skill provided the perfect disguise for darker pursuits. His reputation flourished. His circle of influential clients widened. He understood discretion, understood profit, understood how easily lives could be maneuvered when shielded by respectability. The heavy oak door in the basement remained locked. It still commanded Ense. It still inspired avoidance. Yet for those who knew, for Nora, for Henry, for Ruth, its meaning had changed forever. It was no longer merely a source of fear. It had become a monument to calculated cruelty, to the bureaucratic precision with which human beings could be erased. Harrow Hill's true horror was never something spectral or supernatural. It was the ordinary, methodical evil that thrives behind polished reputations and lawful structures. It was the cold deletion of lives, recorded not in graves alone, but in ledgers, signatures, and obedient silence. Some of the most unsettling stories are not about ghosts in darkened corridors, but about the darkness that resides within humanity itself, darkness that hides in systems, in compliance, in the quiet turning of pages. That darkness lingers still, whispering from forgotten corners of history. And if this story has unsettled you, if it has compelled you to question what truths may lie beneath the surface of the past, then perhaps it deserves to be shared. Stories like this keep memory alive. They ensure that echoes, once nearly